The Galactic Council had ruled the stars for more than 1 million cycles, and all that time, they had never known fear. They had never faced a challenge they could not crush. They had never met a species that dared to stand against them. 347 species bowed to their will, spread across 12 galaxies that stretched beyond imagination. And the Council controlled them all from their massive Citadel station that floated in eternal orbit around the black hole known as Motherunth. 12 high arbiters sat upon their thrones of living crystal, each one representing the most powerful civilizations in the known universe. And together, they decided which species would live and which would die on this particular day. They had gathered to discuss a small blue world on the edge of an unremarkable galaxy, a planet its inhabitants called Earth. Ambassador Vethrix of the Solari Dominion stood before the Council, his body made of shifting crystals that caught the light and scattered it in patterns that showed his emotions. And right now, those patterns displayed nothing but contempt and disgust. "The humans have been observed for 3 of their centuries," he announced, his voice echoing through the vast chamber where thousands of delegates from across the cosmos had gathered to witness the proceedings. "And our scientists have reached a conclusion that cannot be ignored." He waved one crystalline limb, and a holographic display appeared in the center of the chamber, showing images of human history that made many delegates gasp in horror. Wars stretched across the display, violence and conflict marking nearly every generation, weapons growing more terrible with each passing decade. And through it all, the humans kept multiplying and spreading and growing stronger. "They are violent beyond measure," Vethrix continued, "and they are unpredictable in ways that our best analysts cannot model or understand. But worst of all, they are adaptive in ways we have never seen before." High Arbiter Zolveth, the most ancient and powerful of the 12, leaned forward on his throne, his massive form casting shadows across the chamber as he spoke in a voice like grinding stone. "What is your recommendation, Ambassador?" Vethrix's S-crystals flashed bright red, the color of absolute certainty among his kind. 48 hours ago, our deep space probes detected something that changes everything," he said. And the holographic display shifted to show technical readouts that made the assembled delegates murmur in alarm. "The humans have begun developing faster than light technology, and our projections indicate they will achieve success within 2 of their decades." Silence fell across the chamber, heavy and terrible. Every species present knew what this meant, for the Council had faced this situation many times before, and they had always responded the same way. "If they achieve FTL capability," Zolveth said slowly, "they will spread beyond their single world. And a species this violent cannot be allowed to infect the galaxy." Vethrix nodded, his crystals now glowing with cold blue determination. "The Council must act now, before it is too late. And my recommendation is the same recommendation we have given for 312 species before this one." He paused, letting the weight of his next words sink into every mind present. "Humanity must be sterilized." The vote was unanimous, as it always was in such matters, for no species on the Council wanted to risk a violent newcomer disrupting the order they had maintained for so long. And within minutes, the decree was official: the extinction fleet, 12,000 warships strong and armed with weapons that could crack planets in half, received their orders and began their journey toward the small blue world called Earth. A tradition demanded one final step, a formality that served no real purpose except to satisfy the Council's sense of justice. A warning transmission was sent to Earth, giving the humans one standard rotation to make peace with their primitive gods, before the fleet arrived to end their existence. High Arbiter Zolveth watched the transmission leave and felt nothing but mild satisfaction, for this would be quick and clean, much easier than some of the other extinctions he had ordered. And within days, there would be no evidence that humans had ever existed at all on Earth. The message arrived at 3:47 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time. The transmission cut through the planet's communication networks like a knife, overriding every satellite and every ground station with the cold, mechanical voice of the Galactic Council. Inhabitants of the third planet orbiting the star you call Sol, you have been judged by the Galactic Council and found unworthy of continued existence. And the extinction fleet has been dispatched to carry out this judgment within one of your planetary rotations. The message continued with technical details that most humans could not understand, explaining exactly how their world would be destroyed. But it ended with words that needed no translation. Make peace with your primitive beliefs, for your species will soon cease to exist in bedrooms and offices and military installations around the world. People who heard the message felt their blood run cold, but none of them could have known that this moment had been anticipated for longer than most of them had been alive deep beneath the Swiss Alps, in a facility that appeared on no map and existed in no government record. A phone rang in an office that had waited 60 years for this call. General Amara Cole picked up the receiver, her hand steady despite the weight of what she was about to do. And she listened as her aide read her the translation of the alien message. She was 73 years old, and she had spent her entire adult life preparing for this exact moment, training for a war she had hoped would never come, building weapons she had prayed would never be used. But the council had made their choice, and now there was no turning back. She pressed a button on her desk that connected her to only 7 people on the entire planet. 7 leaders who shared the burden of humanity's greatest secret, and when they answered, she spoke words that would change the galaxy forever. "This is General Cole initiating the Terran contingency," she said, her voice calm and cold. "The council has declared extinction, and they are sending their fleet, so wake the sleeping giant immediately, because it is finally time, across the world, in hidden bases that the public did not know existed. Men and women who had trained their entire lives began moving toward their stations, and in the dark spaces between planets, something massive began to stir." The year was 1962, and deep in the frozen wilderness of Siberia, a Soviet patrol team discovered something that would change human history forever. A craft had fallen from the sky. Not a satellite or a missile as they first suspected, but something entirely different. Something that should not have existed according to everything humanity believed about the universe. The ship was small, barely larger than a truck, and its hull was made of a metal that seemed to shift colors in the dim winter light. And inside they found a creature that was definitely not human. The being was dying, its strange purple blood leaking from wounds that the Soviet doctors had no idea how to treat. But before it passed from this world, it spoke to the humans gathered around it. "You are not ready," it said through a translation device that seemed to pull words directly from the minds of those who listened. "And the council will come for you, as they always come for the young and the fierce. So hide your fire, little ones, and hide it until you cannot hide it any longer." The creature died minutes later, leaving behind a warning that the Soviet leadership took very seriously indeed. Within weeks, representatives from the Soviet Union and the United States met in secret, putting aside their public hatred to discuss this new and terrifying truth. For the alien ship contained databanks that painted a picture of the galaxy that made both superpowers realize they faced something far worse than each other. The Galactic Council had destroyed over 300 species that they considered threats, and humanity matched every criterion for being labeled dangerous. The Cold War continued in public, with both nations threatening each other with nuclear weapons and fighting proxy wars across the globe. But behind closed doors, something unprecedented was taking shape. They called it the Terran contingency, and every major nation was eventually brought into the secret. For this was a threat that no single country could face alone. The space race that captivated the world was not what it seemed. For while the public watched rockets carry astronauts to the moon, hidden facilities were using the alien technology to build something far more powerful. Bases were constructed on the dark side of the moon, shielded from observation by any telescope on Earth and deep beneath the Antarctic ice. Factories began producing weapons that used principles human scientists barely understood. The ocean floors hid shipyards where vessels larger than aircraft carriers took shape in absolute secrecy. And every nation contributed what they could, putting aside centuries of conflict for the sake of survival. 60 years passed, and the children of the first scientists became scientists themselves, and their children after them, each generation carrying forward the sacred duty of preparing for a war they hoped would never come. General Amara Cole had been born into this secret, her father having served as one of the early engineers on the project, and she had spent her entire life working toward this moment, climbing the ranks of an organization that existed in no official record. Now she stood in the command center buried deep within the moon's surface, watching holographic displays that showed the true might of human ingenuity. 700 warships floated in hidden positions throughout the solar system, concealed behind asteroids and within the gas giant's magnetic fields, and even in orbit around the sun itself, where the corona's radiation masked them from any sensor. These were not the primitive rockets that the Council's observers had seen, for these were vessels of war built from reverse-engineered alien technology and enhanced with 60 years of human innovation, and the weapons they carried were things that the galaxy had banned long ago. Weapons so terrible that even the Council feared to use them. "Show me the Prometheus Armada," Cole ordered. And the holographic display expanded to reveal the full scale of humanity's secret fleet. Admiral Chun stood beside her, his weathered face showing nothing of the emotions he must have felt. For he had commanded these ships in simulation 1,000 times, but never imagined he would actually lead them into battle. "All vessels report ready," he said, his voice steady with the discipline of a lifetime. "Every weapon system is online. Every crew is at their station. And we can launch within 15 minutes of your order." Cole nodded slowly, her eyes moving across the display that showed ships with names like Vengeance and Retribution and Judgment. Names chosen by people who had spent decades imagining this terrible day. "What about the Orpheus Protocol?" she asked. And even saying those words made her feel cold inside. Chun's jaw tightened, and she saw something flash in his eyes that might have been fear or might have been anticipation. "The system is ready," he said. "But General, you know what it does. You know what it will do to those it targets. And there will be no going back once we activate it." She knew, for she had read the classified reports and spoken with the scientists who had created it. And she understood that the Orpheus Protocol was not a weapon in any conventional sense. It was something far worse. "They gave us no choice," she said quietly, "for they came to murder our children and burn our world. And they did not even send scouts first because they think we are primitives who will die without a fight." She turned to face the assembly of commanders from every nation on Earth, men and women who had trained in secret for a war that no one outside these walls knew was possible. 60 years, she said, her voice carrying across the command center. 60 years of preparation and sacrifice and secrecy. And every life lost in the shadows was for this exact moment. She activated the fleet-wide communication channel, knowing that her words would reach every ship and every soldier who waited in the darkness between worlds. "The Council has made their choice, and now we will make ours, so all ships execute Operation Ares Rising immediately." She paused, feeling the weight of history pressing down upon her shoulders. "And may whatever gods exist forgive us for what we are about to do." Across the solar system, 700 ships began to move, emerging from their hiding places like predators rising from the deep. and the crews aboard them felt something strange and powerful filling their hearts. It was not fear, though fear was certainly present, and it was not hatred. Though hatred would have been justified, it was something older and stronger, something that had driven humanity through ice ages and plagues and world wars, something that made them refuse to die no matter what the universe threw at them. It was the will to survive. And it burned brighter in humanity than in any species the galaxy had ever known. Extinction Fleet had no idea what was coming for them. High Arbiter Zolveth watched from the comfort of his throne as the Extinction Fleet entered the Sol system, and he felt nothing but satisfaction at how smoothly the operation was proceeding. 12,000 warships, each one capable of destroying a small moon, spread out in perfect formation as they approached the third planet from the star. And sensors showed no resistance, no weapons platforms, nothing that could even slow them down. "The humans have not even attempted to flee," reported one of his aides. "And our scans show only primitive chemical rockets in orbit around their world. Vessels so weak that our smallest fighter craft could destroy them with ease." Zolveth made a sound that passed for laughter among his kind, a deep rumbling that echoed through the Citadel chamber where he and the other High Arbiters had gathered to watch the extinction unfold. "They are even more primitive than we suspected," he said, "and this will be over within the hour, so prepare the declaration of successful sterilization for broadcast to the Council membership." But even as he spoke those words, something strange began happening to the fleet's sensor readings. At first, it seemed like a glitch, a momentary interference in the communication network. But then more and more ships began reporting the same anomaly. They were detecting energy signatures that should not exist, power readings that exceeded anything in the Galactic database. And they were coming from everywhere at once. "What is happening?" Zolveth demanded, leaning forward on his throne as the holographic display began filling with warning indicators before anyone could answer. The first ships died. They did not explode or burn or break apart, for they simply ceased to exist, vanishing from reality as though they had never been there at all. And the quantum collapse warheads that struck them left behind nothing, not debris, not radiation, not even empty space where the ships had been 700. Human vessels emerged from hiding places that should have been impossible, rising from the sun's corona where the heat should have destroyed them, emerging from within the gas giants' crushing atmospheres, appearing from behind asteroids where they had waited in perfect silence for 60 years. The Prometheus Armada had revealed itself, and it was everything humanity's enemies had never imagined. Admiral Chun sat in the command chair of the flagship Defiance, watching his tactical display as the fleet unleashed weapons that the galaxy had forbidden since before the Council even existed. "All ships concentrate fire on the central formation," he ordered, his voice calm despite the chaos unfolding around him. "And do not stop firing until every last one of them is gone." The dimensional shear cannons activated next, tearing holes in space-time itself. And the Council ships that were caught in these rifts were pulled apart across multiple dimensions simultaneously, their crews dying in ways that physics said should not be possible within 4 minutes. Over 11,000 Council ships had been destroyed, and the survivors were in complete panic, their formation broken, their commanders screaming for orders that never came on the Citadel station orbiting Moderan. High Arbiter Zolveth watched in horror as the impossible unfolded before his eyes. "How is this possible?" he demanded. But none of his aides could answer, for nothing in the Council's million-year history had prepared them for this. "Get me communication with the fleet commander now." But the fleet commander was already dead, his flagship having been among the first to fall, and the remaining 800 ships were scattering in every direction, trying to escape the human vessels that hunted them with terrifying precision. Then, at minute 5, something even worse happened. The human fleet activated their faster-than-light drives. But they did not retreat toward Earth as Zolveth expected. For instead, they vanished from the Sol system entirely and began appearing at locations across the galaxy. The Citadel's sensors screamed warnings as human ships emerged at 17 different council strongholds simultaneously, as military bases and supply depots and command centers that had never faced attacks suddenly found themselves surrounded by vessels that should not exist, and every single one of those vessels was broadcasting the same message, translated into every language the Council had ever recorded. You threatened our world, and you threatened our children, and you have made the last mistake your Council will ever make. The voice belonged to General Amara Cole, and she spoke with a calm fury that made every being who heard it feel something they had not felt in a very long time. They felt afraid at minute 6. The first human ships arrived at Motherran itself, emerging from FTL travel in perfect formation around the Citadel station. And Zolveth finally understood that this was not a battle, it was an execution. Activate all defensive systems, he roared. But his commands came too late for the Citadel's shields, designed to withstand anything the galaxy could throw at them, crumbled under weapons they had no defense against. At minute 7, the shields failed completely, and Zolveth watched as the human flagship moved into position directly in front of the Citadel's main viewport, so close that he could almost see the faces of the creatures aboard it. Then he received one final transmission, and this one came from General Cole herself. You thought we were primitive, she said, and her voice carried a weight that seemed to press against his very soul. But we learned from your crash scout 60 years ago, and we built weapons you cannot imagine. And now you will understand what happens when you threaten humanity. She paused, and when she spoke again, her words sealed the fate of the Galactic Council. Activate the Orpheus Protocol at minute 8. Reality itself seemed to twist and scream as the weapon engaged. And Zolveth had one brief moment to understand what was happening before his consciousness was torn from existence. Orpheus Protocol did not destroy, for destruction would have been merciful compared to what it actually did. It erased every member of the Galactic Council, every High Arbiter, every delegate, every soldier and servant and administrator who had participated in the decision to exterminate humanity was removed from the timeline itself, pulled out of existence as though they had never been born. The Citadel remained, but it was empty. A hollow shell containing no bodies and no records and no evidence that anyone had ever been inside 8 minutes after threatening Earth. The Galactic Council stopped to exist, and across 12 galaxies, billions of beings who had lived under Council rule suddenly found themselves free, staring at their communication devices and wondering what had just happened. The humans had done what no one in a million years had even dreamed was possible. They had won. The galaxy had never known silence like this before for a million cycles. The Galactic Council had been the center of everything, the source of all law and order and power, and now they were simply gone. Erased so completely that the Citadel station floated empty around Motherran like a tomb without bodies on. 100,000 worlds. Beings of every shape and size stared at their communication screens and tried to understand what had just happened. For the reports flooding in seemed impossible. Seemed like some kind of fever dream from which they would surely wake, but they did not wake. And the reports kept coming, each one confirming what no one wanted to believe. The Council was gone, and the humans had done it. Fear spread across the stars faster than any ship could travel, carried by whispers and rumors that grew more terrifying with each retelling. Some said the humans were demons from some forgotten dimension, creatures of pure destruction who had been waiting since the beginning of time to unleash their fury upon the galaxy. Others claimed they were ancient weapons, created by a long-dead civilization, finally activated after millennia of waiting. But the truth When it finally emerged, was somehow even more frightening. The humans were just people, mortal and fragile and short-lived. Beings who had crawled out of mud and built their way to the stars through nothing but stubbornness and ingenuity, and an absolute refusal to accept their own extinction ambassador. Kalmari of the Vethany Collective sat in her quarters on her homeworld. Staring at the communication device she had been afraid to touch for 3 days. Species had suffered under council rule for 12,000 years. Their population cooled whenever the council decided they were growing too numerous. Their technology limited to whatever the high arbiters permitted. Their culture slowly dying under restrictions designed to keep them weak and compliant. And now the council was gone, removed by creatures from a single world on the edge of an unremarkable galaxy. She knew she should feel joy, or relief, or hope for the future, but all she felt was terror. For if the humans could destroy the council so easily, what would stop them from doing the same to everyone else? But she was an ambassador, and her people needed answers. So she gathered her courage and activated the transmitter, Humans of Earth. She broadcast. Her 4 hearts pounding so hard, she thought they might burst. We seek to understand what has happened. And we seek to know what you want from the galaxy you have just conquered. She expected silence. Or perhaps a demand for surrender. But instead she received a response within hours. Delivered not by a warship, but by a simple communication drone that carried no weapons at all. The image that appeared on her screen showed a human woman, older and tired-looking, with gray hair and lines around her eyes that suggested a lifetime of burdens. And something about her face made Kalmari pause. This was not the face of a conqueror or a destroyer, for this was the face of someone who had done terrible things and knew it. Someone who was not proud of what she had accomplished. "I am General Amara Cole," the human said, her voice quiet and measured. "And I speak for the people of Earth when I say that we want what we have always wanted since we first looked up at the stars." She paused, and Kalmari saw something in her eyes that looked almost like pain. "We want to live," Cole continued, "and we want to raise our children without fear. And we want to explore and create and simply exist without the threat of extinction hanging over our heads every single day." She took a breath. And when she spoke again, her words were heavy with a weariness that Kalmari recognized from her own long years of struggle. "We did not seek this war. And we did not want to build these weapons. And for 60 years, we hid in the shadows of our own solar system, hoping that the council would overlook us, hoping that we could grow strong enough to defend ourselves without ever having to actually fight." Her eyes hardened, and Kalmari saw something fierce flicker beneath the exhaustion. "But the council came anyway," Cole said. "And they sent 12,000 ships to murder our children and burn our world. And they did not even bother to learn anything about us first, because they were so certain we would die without resistance." Shook her head slowly, and Kalmari thought she saw the ghost of a smile on the human's lips. "They were wrong, and now they are gone. And we are left trying to figure out what to do next." Kalmari found herself leaning forward, desperate to hear what the human would say next. "What happens now?" she asked. Her voice trembling despite her best efforts to control it. General Cole was silent for a long moment, and Kalmari could see her thinking, weighing her words with the care of someone who understood that everything she said would be heard by billions of beings across the galaxy. "Now we decide what kind of future we want," Cole finally answered. "And I hope, more than I have ever hoped for anything, that we can build something better than what came before." She looked directly into the camera, and Kalmari felt as though the human was speaking directly to her. The council ruled through fear and violence, crushing anyone who might one day become a threat, and they called it peace. But it was just tyranny wearing a mask. She paused. "We do not want to be like them. And we do not want to rule the galaxy. And we do not want anyone to fear us." A strange expression crossed her face. something between sadness and determination. But I also know that trust cannot be demanded, and that the galaxy has every reason to be terrified of what we have done. So we will have to prove ourselves through actions, not words. She straightened in her chair, and Kalmari saw something shift in her bearing. The exhaustion replaced by purpose in 1 year. We will host a gathering on our world, Cole announced, and every species that wishes to come will be welcome. And there we will discuss what the future should look like. She spread her hands in a gesture that seemed oddly vulnerable for someone with so much power. We are asking for the chance to prove that we are not monsters. And we understand if many species are too afraid to accept that invitation. Kalmari sat in silence for a long time after the transmission ended, her foreheart still pounding, but something had changed in the rhythm. It was not fear anymore. Or at least not only fear for the first time in 12,000 years. She felt something she had almost forgotten existed. She felt hope. 1 year had passed since the day the Galactic Council vanished from existence, and Earth had transformed into something no one could have imagined. The city of Geneva had been chosen to host the first Galactic Assembly, and massive structures had risen from the ground to accommodate beings of every size and shape. Buildings designed by human architects, working alongside experts from dozens of alien species who had dared to come early and help with preparations. 1,700 species sent representatives, some traveling for months across impossible distances, each one driven by a mixture of fear and hope and desperate curiosity about the creatures who had done what no one else in 1,000,000 years had managed to do. Prometheus Armada remained in orbit around Earth, 700 warships hanging in the sky like silent guardians, and every delegate who looked up at night could see them. A constant reminder of what humanity was capable of, but it was not the ships that captured the attention of those who came to Earth. For it was the humans themselves who proved to be the greatest surprise. Ambassador Kalmari walked through the streets of Geneva on the morning of the assembly, her 4 eyes taking in sights that contradicted everything she had expected to find. Human children ran and played in the parks, their laughter echoing off buildings that bore no resemblance to military installations. And parents watched over them with the same anxious love that Kalmari remembered from her own people before the council had taken so much from them. Artists painted murals on walls, musicians played instruments on street corners, and vendors sold food to anyone who wanted it, asking nothing in return from the alien visitors who had come to see the world that had shattered the galaxy's order. These were not the cold warriors that Kalmari had imagined, not the ruthless killers who had erased the council from existence, for these were just people, living their lives with a warmth and openness that seemed utterly at odds with their fearsome reputations. She made her way to the great hall where the assembly would convene, passing through security checkpoints staffed by humans, who smiled and offered greetings in languages they had only recently learned. And she found herself smiling back despite the nervousness that still churned in her stomachs inside the hall. Thousands of delegates had already gathered, representing more diversity than any single gathering in galactic history. And at the center of the vast chamber stood a simple podium where a human waited to address them. All his name was Yusuf Okonkwo, and he had been elected by the people of Earth to serve as their first ambassador to the galaxy, a role that no human had ever held before. He was tall and dark-skinned, with hair that had turned gray from stress during the year of preparations, and his eyes held a kindness that seemed impossible for someone who represented such devastating power. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice amplified to reach every corner of the chamber. "And thank you for trusting us enough to make this journey, for we know that many of you were afraid. And we understand why." He looked across the assembled delegates, meeting eyes and sensors and perceptual organs of every type. "We know what you fear," he continued. "For you fear that we will become what the council was, that we will use our weapons to dominate and subjugate and exterminate anyone who displeases us. He shook his head slowly, and Kelmari saw genuine emotion in the movement. We built those weapons because we had no choice. And we developed the Orpheus Protocol because we knew that a conventional war against 12,000 ships would mean our extinction, not theirs. He spread his hands, palms up. In a gesture of openness, we are not conquerors. And we have never wanted to rule anyone, for we are survivors, nothing more. People who refused to die when the universe decided it was our time. He paused, letting his words settle across the vast chamber. The council ruled through fear, crushing potential threats before they could become real, and they called it wisdom. But it was just murder dressed up in nice words. His voice grew stronger, filled with conviction that made Kelmari lean forward in her seat. We will not do that. And we do not want anyone to bow to us or serve us or fear us. For what we want is something the council never offered the galaxy. He smiled, and it transformed his entire face into something warm and welcoming. The Prometheus Armada will remain, but not as a threat, for it will serve as a shield for any species that cannot defend itself. Any world that faces extinction, any people who simply want to live in peace without powerful neighbors deciding they should die. Murmurs rippled through the assembly, and Kelmari heard 100 different languages expressing the same emotion. Disbelief mixed with desperate hope. "What do you ask in return?" she called out, rising from her seat before she even realized she was moving. "For no one offers protection without expecting something." Okonkwo turned to face her, and his smile widened. "We ask for friendship," he said simply, "and for trade and knowledge and the chance to learn from species who have been among the stars for thousands of years while we were still learning to make fire." He gestured toward a group of human children who sat in a special observation gallery above the main chamber. "We have musicians who dream of hearing alien harmonies, and scientists who want to study worlds they have only seen in images, and children who look up at the sky every night and wonder who might be looking back." His voice softened, and Kelmari heard something in it that she had not expected, something that sounded almost like loneliness. "We ended the council in 8 minutes, and that act will define us in the history books forever. But that is not who we want to be. And that is not what we want to be remembered for." He straightened, and his words carried across the chamber with quiet power. "We want to build something better. A galaxy where species can grow and change and make mistakes without facing extinction. A future where diversity is celebrated instead of feared." He looked directly at Kelmari, as though sensing that she represented the question burning in every heart present. "And we are asking, not demanding, if you will help us try." Silence fell across the chamber, heavy with possibility, and Kelmari felt her 4 hearts pounding as she weighed a decision that would shape her people's future for generations. Then, she did something that surprised even herself. She crossed the chamber floor, climbing the steps to the podium where Okonkwo stood, and she extended her 3-fingered hand toward him in a gesture that her people used only for those they trusted completely. "Among my people," she said, her voice shaking only slightly. "This means we place our lives in your care." Okonkwo looked at her hand for a moment, then gently took it in his own, his grip warm and careful, and somehow exactly right. "Among mine as well," he said one by one. Other delegates began to rise, crossing the floor to join them, extending hands and tentacles and appendages of every imaginable kind toward the podium. And Kelmari watched as the gesture spread across the chamber like a wave. She saw tears on many faces, both human and alien. Tears of relief and joy, and something that felt like the beginning of healing after wounds that had festered for far too long. The council had ruled through fear for 1,000,000 cycles, taking what they wanted and destroying anyone who might someday challenge them. Humanity was offering something different. And watching the assembly come together, Kelmari finally allowed herself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, this time it might actually work outside the Great Hall. The sun was setting over Geneva, painting the sky in colors that Kelmari had never seen before, and she thought it might be the most beautiful thing she had witnessed in her long life. A new age had begun, and for the first time and longer than anyone could remember, the future seemed bright.